Good deal. So my name's Tom Tebow, and I'm going to be your instructor for business law. I'm a full-time instructor here at CSU, but I am also a full-time practicing attorney. And the reason I tell you that is because one of the requirements for teaching this class is that you have to actively be practicing law. So kind of have two jobs, one here and one at my law office. I've been here full-time meaning teaching all the business law classes for about 5 years. And then before that, I was part-time, meaning I taught a couple of them here and there over the last 15 years or so. But I'm glad to be here full-time. I love teaching at CSU. I like being able to have two jobs. And this is probably my favorite job of the two if I had to pick. The other reason I tell you that is that because I do have another job, I'm not physically present on campus very often. I'm here obviously on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings. I have a class before this one, also business law, same classroom. So I'm here from like 9:30 to, when's this get over? 12:15? Is that right? 12:15 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But that does not mean that I'm not available to you. I'm just not sitting in my office having office hours and doing that. I've found that when I tried that, students didn't really come by office hours much anyway. So I am available to you by appointment anytime you need me. Phone, Zoom, in person, here on campus or downtown where my office is. I will accommodate whatever you need. I know I'm not here physically, and so I'm glad to be available anytime that you need me. Also, the best way to contact me, because I'm not here all the time, is by text. My cell phone is in the syllabus, and I encourage you to use that. If you have any questions or if you need to let me know anything, just text me. I can get that immediately. I can text back when I'm in court or if I'm in a meeting or if I'm doing something. I can text you at night. Excuse me, I don't really check my email as much because my CSU email, because they made some rule last year where you can't automatically forward your email to a non-school address. So I used to just have it come to my work email, and that way I'd get it. But now I have to log in and go through all that. That sounds like a really old man complaint, doesn't it? I have to log in and all that, but it is a pain in the ass to check all these different emails. So text me, email me to my work email is better than my school email. But inevitably, some of you will email my school email, and I do try to check that when I can. But if you need me, the best way to do is text, and you can do that 24/7. I'm going to go over just some basics of kind of how the class is set up, and then we're going to jump right into our content for this week. Let me pull up my notes so I can make sure I don't forget anything. All right. This is my first time in a smaller classroom. I'm usually downstairs in one of the auditoriums. So I kind of like this, except for it's hot in here. I don't like that part, but maybe we'll fix that. In my auditorium classes, I like to have everybody sit in the front and in the same seat, but I don't think that's as necessary up here. You can sit where you want to sit. It helps me learn your name if you sit in the general area, but by the third or fourth class, I'll know who you are no matter where you're sitting. So we don't really have an assigned seat. I do have an attendance policy, though. And I'm going to tell you up front that I'm the biggest hypocrite that walked when it comes to attendance. When I was a student, I absolutely hated attendance policies. And I hated the professors that had them because I felt like, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I was interested in doing the least amount I needed to do to get the grade I needed and nothing more. Okay. But I also found that in the classes that I attended, I did better and I learned more. And now that I'm on this side of the classroom, if I'm going to come and go through all this, then I want you to have to come and listen and participate in all that. So I'm telling you up front, I realize that I'm being hypocritical about it, but I do have a pretty strict attendance policy. And it is geared toward you. You will do better in the class if you come. It works like this. You can have 5 absences for the whole semester. Use them however you want. You do not have to let me know if you're sick or if you have something going on. It's up to you to use them however you want. I don't like being the referee of what is an excused absence and what isn't. Just use them however you want. But once you use them, that's it. People who go over 5 usually end up getting dropped from the class. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't extenuating circumstances. You know, I've had students give birth. Back in the COVID area, we had people getting COVID. That still happens. I've had students had surgeries. I know that a lot of my students have full-time jobs. I get that. A lot of you are student athletes that have conflict. I'll work with you on all that. But you need to let me know ahead of time when you need an accommodation that way. What I don't like is student is absent 5 times, and the 6th time they come to me with this story about they've got some important work thing to do, which is important. But you should have thought of that before you just took 5 on your own. So if you've got something coming up that you need an accommodation for, by all means, let me know. I'm not saying that I'm so strict on that there are no exceptions, but generally speaking, I have found that most people don't need more than 5 absences. So that's how that works. So I will do take attendance. Along those same lines, I don't, and we'll talk in a second about how your quizzes and testing go, but I don't usually accept late work after the fact. If you let me know before the fact that you're having issues with a deadline, you've got some work event, you've got an athletic event, you're sick, something like that, let me know and I'll extend a deadline for you. What I don't do is the next morning after something is due and people text and say, oh, I left this one I got last semester. I left my phone in the bar on Saturday night and they locked up and they don't open until Tuesday morning. That's your problem. That's not mine. If you're sick or you got something, really important, that I'm fine with that. But I generally don't like to referee what is a legitimate excuse and what isn't. So my thinking is just do your work on time and we'll all be good. So the way that I've set up the class is that we run on 1 week increments. So every Monday, I'll post the content for that week. And I'm going to test y'all real quick. Tell him, the people who came in late, tell them what I've said so far. What are y'all's takeaways?
We got 5 absences, use them how you want.
Right? Anything else? Good. All right, that was good. Do we not have enough seats? Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll have I guess there'll be a race for the desks every morning, Tuesday and Thursday morning. Does that bother you to not have a desk today? I can ask about it going forward. We'll figure that out. And I'm not picking on you. I was just seeing if they were paying attention to what I had said so far. We run in 1 week increments. So on Mondays, I'll post the content for that week. It's going to be a lecture outline. It's going to tell you what I'm covering in class. I do that for a couple of reasons. One is so that you can follow along and you can see where I'm headed, and it makes more sense to you if you see my lecture organized in the way that I'm going to present it. And then number 2, it's easier for you to take notes if you've got it in front of you already. You're not writing everything. You're seeing it right there. And if you need to take extra notes, you're just adding to it. So you'll have a lecture outline. You will have any of the other readings that we're going to cover that week. You'll have a key terms page, which is kind of a glossary. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But everything that I want you to read, everything that we're going to cover, and everything that I'm going to test you on is posted every Monday. All right? The way the testing works in this class is that on Monday nights, you're going to have a quiz due. You can do it anytime between Thursday and Monday night at your own convenience. It's all take home. It's all open note. It's all at your convenience. But everything is due by 11:59 on Monday night. The way I like to do it is, and I've found that this works better, is we're going to cover stuff 1 week. I'm going to give you a quiz on it on Monday night. And the next week, we're going to move on to something else. We are not having midterms or cumulative exams or things like that. So you don't need to worry about that. You're just going to have a quiz every Monday night, and then we'll move on to the next thing. My quizzes are designed to make sure that you read and that you paid attention in class. I'm not trying to trick anybody. I'm not trying to give all these super hard things. My philosophy of teaching this class is that if you show up and you listen, and if you do the reading, you're going to learn what I want you to learn. Okay, so I'm really trying to make sure in my testing and quizzing that you have done the reading and that you have participated in class and done what you need. You'll get what you need out of it that way. I promise. We don't have a textbook. That is something that the dean told me a couple years ago, that I didn't have to have a textbook. And when she told me that, I thought, like, well, that can't be right. Like, I'm be teaching malpractice if we didn't have a textbook, right? But what I found was that if I assigned you guys 50 or 60 pages of reading a week, one, you're not going to do it. I wouldn't do it. And number two, there's a lot of stuff in there that's just extra, and it's harder for you to know what's important and what isn't. So instead of a textbook, I'm giving you what I think is important with no extra stuff. So the trade-off is, in exchange for not making you buy a textbook and asking you to read 60 pages a week, I'm only giving you 10 to 12 pages, but I ask you to read those. And that 10 to 12 pages usually includes the lecture outline, so it's just not a ton of stuff. That's my trade-off. No textbook in exchange for me only giving you stuff that I think is important and that I think you need to learn, and I'll ask you to read those. I don't know if anybody has read anything yet, but I do put in all the readings, some Easter eggs here and there. Like if you've done any reading for this week, you'll notice there was something about a color being associated with one of the readings. I'll ask you about that on the quiz, and that's easy money for you. What was the color associated with the case we read? It's written in there somewhere. So when you come across things like that, just make sure you make notes of them, because your quizzes are open note. So I don't have any problem with you guys using any notes you take or your outlines. You good?
I have to go. I have an emergency.
You're good. You're good.
Thank you.
I appreciate you saying that. But if something like that happens, y'all get up and go. I'm not offended. I could tell by the look on your face. Let's see. So I think that I will post the lecture video online in the content module. So if you miss class, you can watch the lecture video if you really want to punish yourself. But I also am recording it, not just in case you miss class, but like I said, my online students, I post this for them as well so they can get the same exact content that y'all are getting. Let me see if there's anything else that I need to say ahead of time. Couple things. I don't give a participation grade, but I am going to call on you whether you want to participate or not. I know you, and that's also hypocritical because I hated teachers calling on me. But that makes me helps me know that you're engaged, and it helps you be accountable for reading the little bit that I do assign you. So I do call on you. I think that our class works better when you're participating and when we're engaged, and everybody learns more, and just better overall experience. I don't have a participation grade per se, but at the end of the semester, I don't have any problem bumping up people who are borderline to higher grades if they've come to class and participated and have been active. I have no problem with bumping up people like that. Conversely, if I've got a borderline grade, but I think that this student has come in and every time I call on them, they're never prepared or they don't have anything to add, then I'm not as eager to bump up that person's grade. So it does count in some way. Other thing I want to address is AI. So we as teachers at this school, with any school, would not be doing our job right if we didn't encourage you to use AI in a constructive, helpful way, right? It's part of our lives. It's not going away. Not only is it part of our lives, it's part of our jobs. We're going to get left behind if we don't learn how to use it the right way. This is not an AI class necessarily, but I do want you to use it if it helps you learn the material. What I don't want is for you to use it instead of doing the work or the material. And I'll give you all an example. I was kind of old man about all this. And I've had decided that I've learned all the new stuff I want to learn, right? That anything coming up from here on out can just be for you young people to worry about. But I got a call from a client in the spring, and it was a client that I give advice to on employment law matters. And it's an HR person, and they will call and say, listen, we got a problem with this employee. She's done this, this, and this, and we're kind of at the end of our rope. We want to fire her. Are we okay legally to do that? And that's a pretty common question I'll get from them. So I gave them my answer and felt good about it. But just as an experiment, I asked ChatGPT the same question that they asked me. I put in the prompt, the facts that they told me about what the employee was doing and what kind of business they were and all that. And it spit out a really good answer. And it was what I had told them, but it said it in a better way than the way I said it. So it made me realize if I had consulted it before I called the client back, I wouldn't necessarily have given them different advice, but I would have presented it to them and delivered the advice in a way that sounded better, made me sound better, was maybe more organized. I tend to talk kind of off the top of my head. So that really opened my eyes to the fact that it can be helpful. Now, what I wouldn't do is ask ChatGPT the question and then just tell the client what ChatGPT said. Okay? That makes me a terrible lawyer. That's not what people are paying me for. That's not why they've hired me for my expertise. So it helped me. And in that case, it would have given pretty much the same advice. But I don't think it's reliable enough to do that. And I think if I'm relying on ChatGPT, then what does my client need me for? They could just go on ChatGPT and say, we want to fire this person. What do you think, Chat? Is that legal or not? And I don't think anybody should feel good about relying on that all the way. So my point in all that is, if you can use it in a way that helps you learn this class and it helps you present information that you're asked to give back in this class in a better way, by all means do that. But if you're going to use it in a way that it substitutes your own work or your own judgment or your own thoughts, that's not good. It's not good from an integrity standpoint, but it's also teaching you, or it's also conditioning you that you don't have to think for yourself. And that has long-term repercussions for your own careers. If we don't learn the actual material and we don't learn how to apply it and think through it critically, then you're not any good to your employer. You're not any good to yourself. That's how I feel about it. So I welcome it if it's helpful. Has anybody tried the ChatGPT tutor mode? Y'all know about this? I think it's out now. And I'll tell y'all, I would never use this myself if I was a student. But you can turn on tutor mode, and if you ask it what is 2 + 2, it'll guide you to the answer without telling you. Like, it might say, what do you think it is? Or how would you approach the problem? Like I said, I would get frustrated with that really fast. But I was just curious if anybody had used that before. So that's my stance on AI. I'll give you another example. In a couple weeks, we're going to have an assignment when we talk about business ethics, where I ask you some of your own personal ethics. And I tell students every semester, I can tell if it's AI generated. And every semester, I get AI generated personal codes of ethics. So this is an assignment. When we get there, you'll see it wants to know, what do you believe? What are your values? Who are you? It's an exercise for you to go through. If you believe that you're somebody that wants to have a computer tell you who you are and what you believe and what you value, that's really sad. And I can tell the ones that are AI generated, and those get zeros. So that's just an example of, if you write your assignment out, say what you believe, what you think, who you are, and then you want to run that through chat to say, does this sound right? or could I say this better? That's the way to do it. But to have a computer think for you and decide what you believe, what your values are, that to me is really, really sad. So before we dive into the content for this week, I want to just talk generally about business law and law. I want you to think about the medical field for a second. If you had a problem with your foot, you wouldn't go to an ear doctor. You wouldn't go to a cancer doctor to see about your foot. The law is kind of the same way. Lawyers are mostly specialists. There's not any lawyers that you're going to go to and you can ask them a question about any area of the law. Nobody knows that. You could ask me a question about tax law, and I would tell you to not hold your breath, because we could go for the next 10 years and I'm not going to figure out tax law. I'm not going to understand it. I'm not going to know what it is. I'm not going to be able to give you any advice on tax law. Okay? My training is in litigation, which is court cases, employment law. The last 10 years or so, I've basically just been doing child welfare law and adoption law. But prior to that, I did a bunch of other business law related things. The point being, this class is not to teach you what the law is in any area. There's no way we could do that. Law students themselves spend a whole year studying criminal law. They spend a whole year studying contract law. They spend a whole year studying constitutional law. We're going to cover each of those in 1 week, 2 class periods. So the idea is not necessarily for you to walk out of here being able to quote chapter and verse of what the law is in any area, but it's to be able to understand the broad concepts, to spot the issues, to be able to recognize, hey, this is a contract law issue. And I remember that there may be some issues with consideration or with agreement, and I need to look into that more. Maybe I need to ask ChatGPT as a start, right? Maybe I need to go to my company's lawyer and ask them. Maybe I need to hire a lawyer. But I want you to be able to be fluent in the basic language of it, not in the specific language of it. I mentioned to you that I do adoption law. The Georgia adoption law is pretty thick. And I've read it countless number of times. But I always go back and check it again. Whenever I get something, I'm like, all right, I need to just go back and so it's not, practicing law is not something that you just memorize and you're good to go. We always go back and look and make sure that what we're thinking and what we remember is what the law actually is. Another point is that the law changes all the time, right? If we spent this whole semester memorizing contract law in Georgia, that does you no good as soon as the legislature turns around in January and changes some of it. It does you no good if you are a resident, speaking to my online folks, or some of you too, you're a resident of another state. You're not coming to Georgia. You don't do business in Georgia. You're not going to. What would be the point of learning Georgia contract law for you? So again, very broad, critical thinking type skills. I want you to be fluent in the basic language of it so that you know enough to be dangerous, but not necessarily not expecting you to walk out of here being experts in any area of the law by any stretch of the imagination. So that's how we're going to approach it. 1 week at a time. We're going to have a different, that's another reason I don't want to do cumulative tests, is that I don't want to wait 2 months to test you on contract law because we're only spending a week on contract law. Why don't we just go ahead and do it then? That's my theory, and the feedback that I've gotten on that is that students tend to like that more. All right, so if you will, has anybody not been able to find the content for this week? All right, everybody has. So you'll see there that I have posted the things that I want you to read for this week. Today, I'm going to start lecturing on sources of law. So I'm going to go along with the outline that I've posted. Now, I'm not going to read it to you. I'm not going on that word for word. What I've put in there is important, so you're responsible when it comes to quizzes for everything that's in there. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to try to concentrate on sort of the things that I think need more explanation or maybe the harder topics. So for today, I'm going to start lecturing. I'll finish lecturing on Thursday. And then the rest of Thursday, when I finish, we're going to talk about the Brown versus Board of Education case that I've assigned to you and the Rule of Law article that I've assigned. Both of those are very short. We'll discuss those on Thursday. I like to lecture on Tuesdays and then discuss on Thursdays. Is generally how it goes, but you know, we sort of roll with the punches. One of the reasons that we're out of seats, I'm sorry. So, if you don't mind in the back, I'm going to work on getting us another desk to figure this. Oh, actually, we're not out of seats because we had somebody leave early. So come on up. All right, and I forgot to ask you, tell me your name. Mr. Coley. All right, in the back? Burns. Okay, gotcha. Trying to make sure I learn all your names as fast as possible. So what we're doing, Mr. Coley, is I just gave basically the introduction on how the course is set up. You're going to want to watch that. I'll post the lecture video to the content page, and you can watch just that part that you missed. But it has some things about how we test, how we're set up, what my attendance policies are, so it'll be real important for you to watch those. All right, so sources of law. So this is a little bit of a review for you if you took high school civics. Do I have any students that are international students in this class? All right, none in this class. I do in the earlier class, and I probably do online. For those of you who are not international, this will be a review of your high school kind of civics somewhat. And for those of you who are international, this might be a little bit new to you. The way that we have set up our government, both at the federal level and the state level, is that we have three branches of government. You all remember this: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. When I say federal government, that means the government of the United States, right? The federal government would be the President of the United States, Congress, the Supreme Court, and all federal courts. Those are separate from each state's government, where they mirror that. Each state is going to have an executive branch led by the governor, a legislative branch led by their state legislatures, and then a judicial branch that is their state court system. So in this country, you're always going to have, at a minimum, two sets of laws that you have to follow. Federal law applies to everybody in the country. State laws apply to the people who are in that state or are doing business in that state. So I said a minimum of two. Let's say you're a Georgia resident and anybody own a business? You own a business in Georgia, but you sell things on the internet to every state in the union. All right? I just expanded the number of laws that you're subject to from 2 to 51. All right? Now you're always subject to federal law. Applies to everybody. You're subject to state law of Georgia because that's where you're incorporated, that's where your business is. And if you do business in other states, their laws apply to you too. That's another reason that we're not learning the letter of the law necessarily in this class. That's too much to know. No one can keep up with 51 different sets of laws and the changes that come along with those all the time. All right? So, from each of those branches of government, we derive laws that we're all bound to follow. So I use the term law generally. That's a grouping of all these different areas of law. I want to get into the specifics for a second. The first is constitutional law. All right? Constitutional law, like the name sounds, the U.S. Constitution lays out the basic framework of our laws. It applies to everybody in the country. Every state has their own constitution as well, but state constitutions cannot contradict the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. You're familiar with constitutional law in this way, or in many ways. You know that we have a guaranteed right to freedom of speech. That comes from the U.S. Constitution. You know that we have freedom of religion, comes from the U.S. Constitution. You know that we have separation of church and state, meaning that government can't be a mouthpiece or it cannot promote religion. That comes from the Constitution. You know that you have the right to a jury trial, comes from the U.S. Constitution. You know that you can't be tried for the same crime twice. The idea of double jeopardy comes from the U.S. Constitution. All of those things are constitutional law. They're broadly written. So, for example, we know that the Constitution guarantees us the freedom of speech. If you look up the First Amendment in the Constitution that enshrines the freedom of speech, you'll just see a general statement that says something like, no person shall be deprived of liberty of speech, something like that. But what you won't find in the Constitution or in the freedom of speech clause is details about it. Right? You're not going to, we know that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Y'all have heard that before, right? We do have freedom of speech, but there are limits to it. The Constitution doesn't say what the limits are. That comes from other sources of the law that we'll get into in a second. The Constitution doesn't say, when it defines freedom of speech, it doesn't say speech includes anything that's written or a picture that you might wear or an action that you might take, like burning a flag. Constitution doesn't say anything about that. But we've learned over time through other areas of the law that it is protected speech to burn a flag. That if I wear a picture on my shirt that doesn't have any words, that is also speech. Speech can be symbolic, figurative, pictorial, artistic, all those things. All right? So I'm getting to that in a second. So that's constitutional law, very general, very broad terms. The supreme law of the land. Nothing can contradict the Constitution. The next area that we get into is statutory law. All right, statutory law is the law that's passed by legislatures. So at the federal level, statutory law would be created by who? Who's our legislative body at the federal level? Congress, that's right. Congress is made up of the Senate and House of Representatives. That's exactly right. Congress is the legislative body at the federal level. Congress, the laws that Congress passes are statutes. At a state level, for Georgia, the Georgia legislature meets for 3 months every year at the beginning of the year, and any laws that they pass are state statutes. They're Georgia statutes. Statutes are published together in bound volumes. That made me sound really old. They're also online. But they are published together in sections grouped by topic. I'll bring an example for you on Thursday. But if you wanted to find like the state tax laws, that's going to be in a different section of the law than the state adoption laws or the state divorce laws or laws on child support and that kind of thing. They're grouped together by subject and topic, and they're bound. And you can go and find them. It's not as statutes are more specific than constitutional law. They spell out the definition of how we would, so for example, like I've given you an example in your notes, battery. The Georgia state statute on battery is in your notes. I'm not testing you on what the Georgia state battery statute is, but I've given it to you as an example. The Georgia legislature passed this law defining what battery is in Georgia. And I think it says something like, I don't want my computer to die. Where is it? Here it is. So this Georgia state legislature passed a statute on battery. It says a person commits the offense of battery when he or she intentionally causes substantial physical harm or visible bodily harm to another. Okay? If I walk out of here, or if I don't walk out of here, if I walk up to Keyshawn and punch him in the face, He calls the police. They arrest me for battery. When I go to court, the state is going to have to prove that what I did to him fits that definition. Okay, that it was intentional, that it caused substantial bodily, or is it bodily or visible harm? Okay, those are the things they're going to have to prove. That's how the state has defined it. Those are statutes passed by legislative bodies. The third area that we get to is case law. So, for example, using my earlier example of freedom of speech, there was a time when states passed statutes that outlawed burning flags, or the U.S. Congress would pass a statute that made it illegal to burn the flag. Somebody burned the flag, got arrested for it, charged with this crime as defined by statute, and they went to court, and their defense in court was, that's unconstitutional because I have the right under the Constitution to freedom of speech, and burning the flag is an expression of speech. Okay? If you read the First Amendment to the Constitution that guarantees freedom of speech, are you going to see flag burning mentioned anywhere in there? You don't. Are you going to see speech defined as expression or actions in there? No, you don't even see speech defined at all. Okay? So courts, when they hear disputes like this, they will interpret the statutes and decide whether or not the set of facts before them, a person burning the flag, constitutes speech that is protected by the Constitution. When courts decide cases like this, they write written opinions, and those become case law. And case law is binding law just like a statute is, and just like the Constitution is. We have to follow what courts have said the law means. We have to follow the way courts have interpreted the law. So the way that evolves is we had the founders of the country draft the Constitution. It says you have a right to freedom of speech. Next thing that comes up is some court has to decide whether speech includes written words. They decided it did. A court is presented with, they have to decide whether or not a picture is speech, whether speech can be symbolic. They decided that it was. They get presented with the question of whether or not burning a flag, actions can be speech. They decided that it is. So in that way, we not only have constitutional law that gives you freedom of speech, but we have case law that is also binding that spells out the different ways that speech is protected. That makes sense to you. So over time, you collect or you end up with volumes and volumes and volumes of court decisions that are binding law. That's called case law. Any lawyer that is going to argue a case in court has to know not only what the statute says, but they also need to know what the case law says, how courts have interpreted this statute in the past. So I can't go to court and say, or I couldn't be arrested for wearing a t-shirt that's offensive. Well, let's say that I am, because there'd be limits. I wear a t-shirt that's offensive while I'm teaching this class. And I'm charged with a crime, obscenity, or whatever the crime might apply. And I go to court and I say, well, this is just, it's symbolic speech. We know that that's protected by the government. The prosecutor, the state who's charging me the crime, they can't go in there and argue that symbols aren't speech. Why can't they do that? Because we've had cases where the courts have said symbols are speech. So they can't go back and argue things that have already been decided. If that makes sense. So in that way, we build up over time, not only just the statute, but this body of case law that interprets the statutes, that guides us into what that statute means. All right? I haven't talked since spring semester, so I'm already going hoarse. By the way, I appreciate y'all being patient with me last week. I just wasn't ready to start class yet. I don't know if y'all can identify with that or not, but just wasn't ready. If anybody feels cheated, then I'll be glad to schedule some makeup sessions with you or something. But I have a feeling nobody will object to that too bad. All right, so we're talking about case law. This body of case law that's built up over time becomes precedent. And by precedent, we mean that future courts are bound to follow past decisions. They're bound to follow that precedent. So in that way, we get predictability in the law. We get stability in the law. We as business people have some guidance on what we can do, whether it's illegal or not, right? We know what the courts have said, so we know how we can govern our actions accordingly. The idea that courts have to follow precedent, you have a term in your glossary for this week called stare decisis. That's a Latin term that means something like it stands as decided or something like that. It's defined for you. But that's the idea that courts have to follow their precedent. The wrench that I will throw into all that is that sometimes courts don't follow precedent. It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen because the law does need to evolve over time. You have some examples, some pretty well-known examples, not just in your lifetime, but recent examples of courts declining to follow precedent and overturning it and creating new law. Two examples that come to mind are one that the Supreme Court found back in the 40s or 50s that the Constitution guaranteed a right for a woman to have an abortion. Okay? States started passing statutes that placed limits on that right. And those got challenged in court as being unconstitutional. The Supreme Court in the Dobbs case a couple years ago went back on decades of precedent and said, you know what, we change our mind. States can place limits on the woman's right to have an abortion. And the states were doing it in different ways. Texas, somebody, or I think Georgia had a heartbeat law that once a heartbeat could be detected, that they made abortion illegal at that point. And under previous law, you could go up to a certain time limit. I can't remember how far it was, but abortion was legal up to a certain point. The Georgia law made it illegal once the baby had a heartbeat. That got challenged. States all around the country were doing this, got challenged, made to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case said, you know what, states can place limits on abortion that are more strict than what we ruled back in the Roe versus Wade case back in decades ago. So I raise that as not to debate abortion, but to show you that courts can change precedent, or they can go against precedent to change the law. And they did in that case. The second one I can think of that is pretty recent is within the last 10 years is the Obergefell case, which made same-sex marriage legal. So the way that worked was that for all of history before that case, courts had held that, so states would make a law saying marriage is defined as between a man and a woman only. And that would be challenged in the courts as unconstitutional, as saying that violates equal protection, the constitutional guarantee of equal protection. In other words, that treats gay people different than straight people, and therefore that's unconstitutional. Up until the Obergefell case, the courts would always say, no, that is constitutional. It's constitutional for states to define it like this. But they changed their mind in the Obergefell case, and they said, you know what? We are going to say that even though we've said in the past that that was constitutional, now we're going to say it's unconstitutional. So from here on out, any law that defines marriage as being between a man and a woman violates the Constitution. All those laws are struck down. And from that point forward, no state could restrict marriage to between a man and a woman. The case that I've assigned you to read for Thursday is Brown versus Board of Education. It's one of the most important Supreme Court cases that they've ever had. And the reason I've assigned it to you is, in that case, the Supreme Court goes against precedent and overrules past cases and makes new law. And when they do that, they've got to tell us through their written opinion how they got there. What rationale did they use for changing the law? They don't just say, yeah, that was the law, but it's not anymore. They're going to tell us how they got there. So the Brown versus Board of Education case involves the idea of that it was constitutional and legal to have separate but equal public facilities, schools, things like that for different races, right? Up until that point, if a state had a school system that was segregated, that had been challenged in court, and the courts had always said up till then that it was constitutional to have separate but equal facilities. It was legal. In the Brown versus Board of Education case, it got challenged again, made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know what? For all these reasons that we're going to get into Thursday, this shouldn't be the law anymore. We find that our Constitution does not allow that. So the law does evolve over time. And then we see that most of the time in case law. The law evolves, statutory law evolves whenever Congress or a state legislature decides to change it. Right? They can vote next session on changing the law, and they will. But case law evolves at a slower pace over time. So far we've talked about constitutional law, statutory law, and case law. The third area is the fourth area I want to get into is administrative law. And I want to make sure we've got enough time. We do. I don't understand why we have clocks that don't work. That makes no sense, but maybe it's because no one looks at a clock anymore but me. All right, administrative law. So if we go back again to thinking about how the three branches of government are split up. The executive branch that's headed by the president at the federal level and a governor at the state level, their charge is to administer the law, carry out the law. Congress makes the laws, state legislatures make the laws, those are statutes. Courts interpret the laws, decide if they're constitutional or not, help define them, but the executive branch is the one that is tasked with carrying them out. So, for example, Congress has passed a law that mandates that businesses don't pollute. And that's oversimplified. It's a little bit more detailed than that. But what Congress didn't do when they passed something called the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, those statutes say businesses can't pollute with what they emit into the atmosphere. They can't emit pollution through water discharge into the waters, those kind of things. They made that illegal. What you won't find in the statute of the Clean Air Act is you will not find the specifics on what constitutes pollution. Like you will not find in that statute the level of mercury that you're allowed to put into the water without violating the law, or the amount of certain kind of smoke that you're allowed to put into the air without violating the law. We know that there are laws that do specify all those. Those come from administrative law. Those come from the agencies that are set up to carry out and enforce those laws. So Congress passes a statute called the Clean Water Act. They say, here, Environmental Protection Agency, you make all the rules that are going to flesh out what it means to have clean air and clean water. And you can enforce them and you do all that. The EPA is the agency that does that. Congress would pass a law saying that everybody has to pay taxes, right? But they don't spell out necessarily all the exact rules for what's income, what isn't income, what you can deduct, what you can't deduct. The IRS does that. That is an administrative agency that is under the executive branch of the government. Congress passes a law saying workplaces must be safe, Occupational Safety and Health Act. But they don't go so far as to say how much weight a ladder has to bear or how much ventilation, how much air has to circulate through ventilation in a factory. They don't say in that Safety Act about wearing hard hats in a construction zone. But we know all that is law. Those are rules that are made by the administrative agency that is tasked with carrying out that law, which would be the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Anybody had any dealings with OSHA in your jobs? They're a pain in the ass, right? Anybody, if y'all had any OSHA inspections, surprise inspections, that's not fun, is it? And they're really picky. And OSHA rules a lot of times don't make a lot of sense because they're applicable to everybody and maybe they don't apply to the specific workplace that you two guys work. But rules that are made by administrative agencies are law, just as much as constitutional law is, just as much as statutes are, just as much as written decisions from courts are that constitute case law. Rules made by administrative agencies have legal authority. We call the lawmaking by administrative agencies rulemaking. Rulemaking. So we have constitutional law, we have statutory law that comes from legislatures and Congress, we have case law that comes from written decisions that courts issue, and we have administrative law that comes from rules made by administrative agencies. All right, those are the four main sources of laws. We didn't get into things like local laws. We have local ordinances that are binding on us, like the Columbus Council makes local laws about property taxes and what kind of animals you can have inside the city limits, how many animals you can have, that sort of thing. Most of the agencies that I was talking about a minute ago were federal agencies, but you have agencies on the state level too. We got anybody in here that hunts? Any hunters? What do y'all hunt? Deer? 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 You know that there's a deer season, right? That's not a law that got passed by the Georgia legislature. That's a rule that got made by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. The Georgia legislature has said there's going to be seasons for different animals, and DNR, you get to make the rules on when those seasons begin and end. So we don't have our lawmakers every session debating when deer season ought to be, right? We just have them, they're passing the laws on a more general level that say we ought to have seasons on different species. DNR goes into the weeds and says this is when you can hunt turkey, this is when you can hunt bear, this is when you can hunt deer, and this is how many you can hunt. Same goes for fishing. So administrative agencies affect us certainly at the federal level, but also at the state level too. You guys that dealt with OSHA, was that a federal OSHA or a state, the state OSHA? State, right? So that was the Georgia workplace safety folks that came in. You also have them on the federal level too. There is, I raised this because it's current and topical. We don't get into this in this class, but the lead executives, the president and governors, mostly the president, they can make laws also. They're called executive orders. Y'all have heard a lot about that lately because the Trump administration has pushed the limits of what the president can make law by himself. Okay. One of the reasons I think they're doing it is to find out where that limit is. I think they have made a lot of executive orders that they know exceed his authority, but they're doing it so that they'll be challenged in court, and the courts will then have to give us more definition on what the limits of presidential authority are. I think their attitude is, we want as much authority as we can get. So let's try to see how much we can get and let the courts tell us where the limits are. so that we're not leaving any areas that we might have some ability to make law left undone. I raise that again because it's topical and it's something that's going on right now if you're interested in it. I generally, I don't do politics at all in this class. I'm very apolitical. I hate all of them. I'm not a person I just don't get into it. So in case anybody is worried that Professor Tebow is pushing one way or another, I don't push either side. So that's kind of where I wanted to go today with the lecture. By Thursday, I would like for you to answer this week's discussion question, which is to kind of introduce yourself. I put a new twist on it this semester. I want you to tell 2 truths and a lie. And we're going to vote on which is the lie and see how well we know each other. Has anybody done this yet? Okay. All right. We've got some time. So with that time, we're gonna vote on yours now. So I know you already packed up. Do you remember what your 2 truths and a lie were? You have? Oh. You haven't done it yet.
No, I thought you meant have you already done it?
The introduction. Have you done your 2 truths and a lie?
Yeah.
All right. Tell us. Do you mind telling us? No. All right. Okay, but don't tell us which is which. No. Okay, here we go.
All right. I'm a junior.
He's a junior.
I'm 19.
He's 19.
Business management major.
It's a business management major. That's a crapshoot, right? All right. Who thinks that he is lying about being a junior? Who thinks he's lying about being 19? Who thinks he's lying about being a business management major? All right. Which is it?
Business management major or an accounting major?
He's an accounting major. He is 19. All right. Okay. That was good. All right. What you got for us?
I worked the best job in the country.
The most dangerous job in the country, which is what?
Which is backwards arborist. So
okay. All right. He's an arborist. Y'all didn't hear that. All right. Next.
I worked at Yellowstone National Park for a season.
All right. Worked at Yellowstone.
And then I was number 3 in the state of Georgia
for swimming. In high school?
Yes.
All right. He was number 3 in the state of Georgia for swimming in high school. Who thinks that that it's a lie that he has the most dangerous job in America? I got a couple of those. Who thinks it's a lie that he worked at Yellowstone? All right, we got some doubters. Who thinks he can't swim? Or he's not as good as he says? All right, which one is it?
I was 5th in the state of Georgia.
He was 5th in the state of Georgia. All right, so he is still really good at swimming, just not quite as good as we thought. Did anybody else do this yet? All right. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that, but if we have extra time at the end of class, I do like to do that because it helps me facilitate class discussion when I know more about you, and I just think it makes things more interesting. So we'll do some more of that on Thursday. All right, so Thursday, read the Brown versus Board of Education case and the rule of law article. Those are the 2 things we're going to discuss Thursday. See y'all then. Oh, who came in after I took roll? All right, hold on. Don't leave yet. I missed some of y'all. All right, Mr. Burns came in, right? Mr. Coley came in. Miss, who else we got? Miss Davis. Miss Davis came in. I saw your computer. And Miss Harris. Are you Miss Harris? You're not Miss Harris.
No.
You are Miss Miles.
Yes.
Got it. So we did not have Miss Upshaw or
I'm right here.
Miss Upshaw's here. Gotcha. So we did not have Miss Battistini or Miss Harris. Okay. Yes, sir. Hey, Tom Tebow. Good to meet you.
I'm a basketball player. I have like a study hall to practice it right late. It's probably going to be the same deal Thursday.
Okay.
I just didn't want you to think I was
You're fine. You're fine. I used to have some golfers who were always late because they couldn't. The timing was different.
right. Like I said, like practice ends at 8.
I
It was either come to class or
That's no
be a little
problem.
bit
That's
late.
no problem. I will understand that all the way.
Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
So after Thursday, then where you have till Monday to take the quiz? Okay, that was my only question.
Yep. Thank you for asking. I'll make sure I make that clear Thursday.
I'm having problems with financial aid. They didn't process my stuff on time.
Okay.
So what they did was drop all my classes.
All right.
I don't have access to
I'm going to
anything.
email you the things for Thursday. And if they don't resolve that in time for you to do the quiz and all, and you need extra time, let me know.
Okay.
Fine with that. That happens every semester with some folks. So I am going to send you my inbox. It'll send me. Right. Tell me your email address. Doesn't matter if it's CSU or whichever one you want.
My personal Jada JadaQuarles17 @gmail.com.
Is that your favorite number?
Yes.
Me too. Mine is 17.
Oh wow.
You're the only person I've ever met like 17. All right, I'm going to email you these 2 readings.
Thank you so much.
That one and that one. And it might not send until I get to the office because there's something wrong with some server. But
Yeah, the
it'll get
Wi-Fi
to
here
you.
is bad.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm not even on Wi-Fi right now. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I work from July to September, right before October.
What's their season like? Does it get cold, or is it year round? Is it just year round?